Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag. Too late now, let's get into today's tale. Marcus Claremont slammed the door shut behind him, and the blinds rattled in their frames. He wasn't a tall man, but he filled the room like a storm cloud. "Lisa," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "I didn't flinch following museum protocol. You went through restricted files. You accessed board-only appraisals. You cross-checked donor histories without clearance." He slapped his palm against the desk between us. "Do you realize what kind of legal exposure that creates?" "Legal exposure," I said slowly, "is precisely the reason I compiled this." I tapped the folder on the table. Forgery, misattribution, falsified provenance. Some of these works never should have been accepted, let alone displayed. He scoffed, pacing behind the desk. "You're too impressionable for this kind of work, always chasing shadows, seeing conspiracies in smudged signatures and bad translations." I stayed seated, my hands calmly folded in my lap, but the muscles in my back were taut. I knew what this was, a test, a threat disguised as a reprimand. Marcus leaned forward suddenly, his eyes sharp. "You will delete every file now, before this turns into something irreversible." I held his gaze. "I won't, Jenny." His tone dropped into something darker. "This is a very sensitive matter. You're not trained for these decisions. I'm trained to spot forged documentation." I said, "It's what I was hired for." "You were hired to research, not to accuse donors. Or, God forbid, the museum itself. Do you think the Heritage Trust would thank us for airing this in public?" "They'd thanked us for doing the right thing," I said. "And it's not just the Heritage Trust. These works cross national boundaries. Some of them were smuggled in, restored improperly, even reattributed for inflated value. That's criminal fraud." Marcus's eyes fell to the folder between us. He reached for it, but I was faster. I slid it back to my side. "That's not the only copy," I said. For a second, I saw the mask slip. His face tightened, not in anger, but in calculation. I had just changed the rules. He straightened. "Let's be honest, Jenny. You're expendable. You're not a donor, not tenured. I could walk out of here, call security, and have your badge deactivated in 10 minutes. Then you'll want to see this." I reached into my bag and pulled out a second folder. This one was slimmer, but far more damning. I laid it gently on the desk. Forged appraisals, all tied to a private holding company in the Caymans. Guess who owns it? Marcus didn't move. He didn't have to. His jaw told me everything. I saw the blood drain from his face before he quickly masked it with a forced laugh. "You're playing with fire." "No," I said, rising from my chair. "I'm holding a mirror, and you don't like what you see." He didn't stop me as I left. He couldn't, not anymore. I didn't sleep much that night, even with the folders locked up and extra backups on 2 drives. My mind ran circles around what Marcus might do next. But under the fear, there was something steadier. The same pulse I'd followed since I was a kid. That little instinct that said, "Something's off. Keep looking." I was 9 when I cataloged every photo in my grandmother's attic. She told me I could take one for a school project. I ended up spending a whole weekend sorting old black hand whites by date, family line, even what town they were taken in. Labeled every envelope in pencil. I liked knowing where things came from, how they got there, why they mattered. That was the start. My name is Jenny Saver. I'm 32, and I work at the DeClaire Museum in Boston as a provenance researcher. That basically means I spend my days asking one question: where did this come from, really? I started my career in Florence, Italy, restoring fresco and cracked monastery walls. My boss back then had a saying: "History isn't quiet, you just have to listen." I think about that a lot, especially now. After Italy, I worked at the Granger Archive in Chicago for 4 years. Then DeClaire hired me to lead the acquisitions research team. At first I thought I'd landed in a dream. The building itself was a palace, vaulted ceilings, climate-controlled vaults, a restoration lab that would make any conservator weep. And Marcus Claremont, well, he seemed like a visionary. He gave a talk during my first week about the museum's moral imperative to safeguard cultural memory. I actually quoted him in my onboarding journal. I wish I could go back and laugh in my own face. The first red flag came maybe 3 months in a Digga sketch with a bizarre chain of custody, a baroness in Warsaw. Then nothing, until a private donation out of Las Vegas. The valuation was triple what made sense. I flagged it in my report. The next morning, that report had been removed from the shared archive and replaced with a clean version. No mention of the discrepancy. I asked Marcus about it in person. He smiled, told me it must have been a syncing error. Another 6 months, and I saw the pattern. Every major donation from a private European collection came with one of 3 provenance firms, all recently registered, all connected to the same 2 law offices. Restoration notes looked eerily similar, like someone was copy-pasting templates. I started digging deeper. I didn't tell anyone, not even Camille, and we've been best friends since undergrad. I kept my head down and built my case piece by piece. Shipment records, courier manifests, export certificates with forged stamps. Once, I cross-checked a 16th century altarpiece against high-rise auction photos and realized it had been digitally aged. The wood was real. The patina wasn't. By year 2, I was sure this wasn't carelessness. This was systematic. Asterisk, and every thread led back to Marcus. He wasn't just overlooking bad paperwork. He was curating it. Some of the forged pieces had never been shown publicly, only displayed in closed-door previews for high-level donors and the appraisals, inflated by firms tied to his brother-in-law's accounting firm. It was an art laundering scheme. Clean old names, dirty new money. I remember standing in the cold storage room late one night, holding a fake 1860s still life in my gloved hands, and thinking, this is exactly how the truth disappears, piece by piece. But not if I could stop it. That was the moment I knew. Marcus wasn't negligent. He was orchestrating it, and I was going to be the one to take him down. It was 3 weeks ago when everything shifted. We were in the conference room going over logistics for the upcoming winter exhibit. Marcus was unusually chipper that day, gliding from person to person with a kind of rehearsed casualness, the kind of mood he got into when he was hiding something. Remember, he was chewing on the cap of his pen when he leaned across the table and said, "Let's make sure the Etruscan mirror is under low light. That surface finish doesn't tolerate too much glare." The room went quiet for a beat, not because of what he said, but how he said it. No one had mentioned the mirror. No one outside of acquisitions even knew we had it. The crate hadn't cleared customs until that morning. I only knew about it because I'd personally confirmed the delivery through the loading dock manager at 7 a.m. That mirror had come in through a shipping route flagged 2 years ago for smuggling North African antiquities. It wasn't in any exhibition plan. It wasn't in the donor ledger, and yet Marcus spoke about it like it had been, cataloged weeks ago. I stared at him across the table. I didn't say a word, just noted it, but inside, my stomach dropped. That was the moment I knew. He wasn't just looking the other way. He was in it that night. I started the deep dive. I pulled every customs report from the last 9 months, every red flag import with incomplete provenance, and cross-referenced them with our internal donor logs. And sure enough, the patterns lit up like a constellation. Half the shipments tied back to the same logistics firm out of Antwerp, a shell company with a fake street address. Several artifacts were routed through 2 non-profit cultural exchange organizations, both of which shared a post office box in Malta. Even traced one invoice back to a fake monastery in France that had supposedly been liquidating its archive. That was the moment I found the name Dario Leone. I'd seen it once before, in a 2018 case out of Naples where he'd been forging Roman coins with artificially aged patties. He disappeared before trial vanished off the books. And now, he was back, quietly embedded in our donor trail under 3 aliases. The craftsmanship matched his known techniques perfectly. Marcus's emails never mentioned him, of course, but I found a scanned copy of a wire transfer to an M. Linetti, routed through Luxembourg. The account number was 1 digit off from one used in a laundering case in Madrid. I remember sitting there at my desk at 2 in the morning, eyes blurry from the screen, and thinking, if I stay silent, I'm complicit. And I couldn't live with that. I had no choice anymore. It was time to bring the whole thing down. 2 days after I compiled the last piece of evidence, I walked into Marcus's office with the folder in hand. He was standing by the window, back turned, sipping something dark from a crystal glass. When he saw me, his face twitched, not in surprise, but in calculation, like he already knew what was coming. "Have a seat," he said, motioning vaguely. I didn't sit. "I'm going to the museum's legal counsel on Monday," I said plainly, "and I'll be contacting the Department of Antiquities Protection. You should know that up front." His jaw flexed. "You're making a very serious accusation." "I'm not accusing," I replied. "I'm reporting." "There's a difference." Marcus walked around the desk slowly, like a lion circling a threat he couldn't quite pounce on. "Let me see what you've got." I placed the folder down in front of him. He opened it, flipped through a few pages, shipping manifests, restoration orders, digital forensics from the scanned paintings, and then closed it again. He sighed. sat back in his chair, smiled. "Jenny," he said with mock patience, "you're passionate. I admire that. But you have to understand things aren't always as black and white as they seem. What looks like irregularities may in fact be fabricated." I finished for him. "Yes, I'm aware." "No," he leaned forward, contextual. "You don't see the big picture yet." I tilted my head. "Then explain it." He paused, just long enough to make it obvious he was buying time, then gave a small grandfatherly chuckle. "Tell you what," he said, steepling his fingers. "Leave this with me for the weekend. Let me go through it properly. And Monday morning, we'll bring it to as a team." I didn't blink. "You're lying." He raised his eyebrows. "Excuse me, you have no intention of going to legal. You want time to bury this? Delete files. Reassign blame. Maybe reroute a few shipping records while you're at it." "Jenny, I'm notifying them either way," I said. "I came to you as a courtesy." Marcus smiled, but this time, it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't want to do this." "Actually," I said, stepping back, "I do." I turned toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I felt it, that shift in the air behind me. I glanced back. His face had gone still, cold, the smile gone. He was watching me like a predator sizing up a wounded animal, but I didn't flinch. Later that night, I called Camille. She picked up on the first ring. "I'm guessing this isn't a social call," she said. I told her everything from the forged appraisals to Dario Leon. I read her the email drafts I'd prepared, the names I was including, the agencies I planned to loop in. Camille didn't hesitate. "You need to go to the Department of Antiquities Protection first thing Monday," she said. "Ask for the whistleblower unit. Request Agent Brielle Kerr. I'll send you the intake form tonight." "And the files," I asked. "Should I upload them to the archive?" "No," she said. "Bring them in person." "And Jenny, yeah. Do not walk into that museum alone on Monday. Not until this is in federal hands." Monday morning felt like a funeral. The museum was too quiet. Normally, the air buzzed, the shuffle of curators and interns, the occasional distant hum of an exhibit door opening, the faint scuff of shoes on marble dot. But today nothing, just stillness. I paused in the lobby, hand tightening around my satchel. The original documents were tucked safely inside. Along with a flash drive backup, Camille had called me twice that morning, once to confirm my appointment with Agent Brielle Kerr at noon, and again to remind me Marcus won't go down without a fight. She wasn't wrong. By the time I reached the third floor, I already sensed it. The receptionist at the acquisitions wing barely looked at me. The HR door, usually HR, was closed tight. I rounded the corner toward my office and found 2 security officers waiting near Marcus's door. "Jenny," said a voice behind me. I turned. It was Vivian, the museum's HR director. She looked pale and uncomfortable, as if she'd been handed a script she didn't want to read. "Can you step into Marcus's office, please?" The security guards flanked the doorway like statues. Inside, Marcus sat at his desk, all smug composure, one leg crossed over the other, hands folded like a politician during a press conference. "Jenny," he said smoothly, "please, have a seat." I didn't. "What is this?" Vivian cleared her throat. "We've received concerning reports of unauthorized data access. You've been linked to offsite transfers of museum documentation to foreign organizations." I blinked. Marcus leaned forward. "Specifically, an email correspondence with Alina Moretti, listed here as a liaison with the Department of Antiquities Bureau in Milan." I almost laughed. "That's not even a real office," I said. "Camille's a cultural heritage attorney based in New York. She has no affiliation with any government entity." Marcus shrugged. "That's not what it says here." He slid a printout across the desk, a fabricated email chain. My name, my signature, fake headers and all. I recognized the photo in Camille's signature, one pulled from her law firm bio, but the contents, utter fiction. Phrases like classified records and archival files requested urgently made it sound like espionage. I looked back at Vivian. "Did you verify this?" She hesitated. "The emails were submitted as PDFs. From an anonymous source." I shook my head. "You didn't even check the headers. This is a botched forgery." Marcus leaned back. "Still, we can't take any chances. You've been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." "That's not how this works," I said. "I've done nothing wrong, and if you try to terminate me without cause, you'll be compounding the legal disaster that's already on your hands." "Jenny," he said softly, "it's done." The guard stepped forward. One of them motioned to my bag. "You can take your personal items," Vivian offered, "but any work files must remain." I smiled. "They're already backed up?" Marcus's smile twitched as the guards walked me to the elevator. I glanced over my shoulder. Vivian looked like she wanted to disappear. Marcus stared back with hollow confidence. He thought he'd won, but I was already halfway to the federal building and Agent Betrayal Kerr would be waiting. They marched me out through the front atrium like I was a thief. No badge, no access, no goodbye. Just me, my satchel, and 2 guards shadowing my every step, past stunned interns and whispering archivists. I kept my chin up. I wouldn't give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing me flinch at the front desk. I caught one last glance of the wall-mounted donor plaque gold leaf names engraved beside works I now knew were fake. Endowed with legacy, it read, "Not for long, outside." The morning sun was blinding. I squinted against it, pulled out my phone, and called Camille. They tried to frame me. I said as soon as she picked up, expected it. She said, "Are you out?" "I'm out." "Good. Let's go." By noon, we were in the federal building. Cold linoleum, buzzing lights, a row of chairs with cracked vinyl. The Department of Antiquities Protection was housed 2 floors up. Camille had arranged everything in advance. The agent who met us was tall, mid-40s, hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. She introduced herself as Agent Betrayal Kerr and wasted no time getting to the point. "You believe your museum director is orchestrating fraudulent acquisitions?" I nodded and handed her the folder. "I don't just believe it," I said. "I can prove it." Camille laid out the timeline while I presented the documentation. Forged provenance papers, smuggled imports, the ties to Dario Leone, the fake email Marcus had used to justify my dismissal. Agent Kerr listened silently. She didn't take notes. She didn't need to. Her expression stayed calm, but I saw her eyebrows lift slightly at the bank transfer documents. "This is detailed," she said finally, "and damning." "No," I said. She leaned back. "We'll open an investigation immediately. We'll need to verify the metadata, trace the logistics firms, and reach out to customs. But based on this, there's enough for probable cause." I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Thank you," I said. Agent Kerr's eyes narrowed slightly. "But Jenny, from this point forward, you're officially a federal witness. That means no more emails, no more discussions with museum staff. Everything goes through us. Understood?" I nodded. "Understood." Asterisk when we left the office, Camille reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "You did it." I gave a small smile. "No, we just started." Back outside, the wind cut through my coat, but I didn't care. I felt lighter. Not because the fight was over, but because it was finally real. No more secret folders, no more playing nice. Marcus wanted me silent, wanted me scared. Instead, I'd gone straight to the people who could destroy him. As Camille drove us away from the courthouse, I looked out the window at the skyline and felt the shift. This wasn't the end of my career. It was the beginning of a reckoning. It was 3 days later when my phone lit up with a restricted number. I was standing in my kitchen, staring blankly into my half-empty coffee mug, when I picked up. "This is Jenny." "Jenny, this is Agent Betrayal Kerr," she said, her voice clipped but calm. "We executed the warrant this morning. Thought you'd want to hear it from me." My stomach clenched. "Go on," I said. "We served the museum at 7:40 a.m. Marcus Claremont was taken into custody on site. He's facing multiple federal charges: art fraud, money laundering, destruction of evidence, and whistleblower retaliation." Asterisk, I closed my eyes. Let that sink in. He didn't resist, no, but he looked surprised, she said. "We also froze approximately $9 million in assets between his personal holdings and related shell accounts." I nearly dropped the mug. $9 million conservatively, she said. "We also seized 23 pieces from the museum vaults for further analysis, most with questionable provenance. The restoration lab is being treated as a secondary crime scene. The museum is closed until further notice." I walked slowly to the window, phone still to my ear. Outside, the city looked the same. Taxis, cyclists, morning commuters, like the world hadn't just flipped upside down. "Did they find the ledger?" I asked. "The original? No, but thanks to your scans, the metadata was enough. And our cyber team found traces of deletion attempts on the museum server, all tied to Marcus's credentials. So he had tried to clean house after all." "Thank you," I said quietly, "for believing me." "You did the right thing," Kerr said. "I'll keep you updated as charges move forward, but I'd suggest staying out of public commentary until we clear the case." "Of course." We hung up. I just stood there for a minute, watching the wind push. Through the trees on my street, I couldn't stop picturing it: Marcus in handcuffs, the vault doors swinging open, agents walking out with crates of masterpieces that were really just high-end lies. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, But what I felt was quieter, heavier. I'd spent years believing in the museum, in its mission, its ethics. Now, it was crime scene tape and sealed exhibits. That afternoon, I sat by the window and watched as local news vans pulled up outside the Declare's entrance. Reporters angled their cameras at the sealed doors. One of them said into a mic, "A shocking turn in what's being called one of the most sophisticated art fraud cases in recent U.S. history." And all I could think was, it started with a signature that looked too clean. The story broke nationally by the end of the week. Every major outlet ran it. Director of Declare Museum arrested in art fraud scandal. They used photos of Marcus in a tailored suit, looking stunned as he was let out in handcuffs, flanked by agents. One article called it a betrayal of cultural stewardship. Another dubbed it the largest breach of institutional ethics since the Clarendon manuscript scandal. But buried in the third or fourth paragraph in every article was my name, Jenny Sevier, former head of acquisitions research, reportedly alerted federal investigators to the irregularities that launched the inquiry. For once, I wasn't a footnote. I didn't read the comments. Camille warned me not to, but the emails came in anyway. Journalists, podcasters, cultural watchdog groups, even former colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years. One afternoon, I got an email from an art historian I deeply admired. She wrote, "You protected what we all claim to value, truth." That's more than most can say. I didn't cry, but I came close. 2 days later, my parents called. We hadn't spoken in weeks. They'd always been proud in a vague, slightly confused way. Museum work was hard for them to picture, not as concrete as being a lawyer or a doctor. But this time, there was something different in my father's voice. "We read about what you did," he said. "We saw the news." My mother came on the line next. "I had no idea you were dealing with that kind of corruption." "I'm proud of you, Jenny." Truly, I didn't say much. Just listened, let the words settle. That meant more than I expected. That weekend, I did an interview for a cultural segment. On PBS, Camille sat just off camera, watching with crossed arms, her way of keeping me grounded. The host was polite, sharp-eyed, well-prepared. "You knew you were risking your career," she said. "Why do it?" I paused, then answered carefully. "Because I knew what it would mean to stay quiet, and because museums aren't about status or prestige. They're about protecting the truth, even when it's inconvenient." She nodded. "And what's next for you?" I smiled. "Something better." That night, I walked home through Back Bay past galleries with quiet windows and curated lighting. I paused in front of a small private museum, the kind that still gets stoner calls when a stolen artifact pops up on the black market. In the window was a print of one of the works we'd pulled from the Declare's vault. Forgery removed pending review. There was something poetic about it. Not hidden, not erased, just ACKNOWLED. I kept walking. By the time I got home, I had 3 new messages. One from a cultural ethics panel in Washington, another from an international art crimes unit in Belgium, and one more from a journalist at The Atlantic, requesting a profile. Suddenly, I wasn't the woman who got fired. I was the woman who told the truth and changed everything. 6 months later, I signed the contract in a conference room overlooking the Thames. The Varley Foundation had flown me out to London for the final round of meetings. Their boardroom was sleek, minimalist glass walls, gray steel, brushed wood, and zero tolerance for nonsense. It was the kind of place where truth wasn't just protected, it was expected. "Welcome to the team," said the director, extending his hand across the table. I shook it. Head of Cultural Integrity, full-time global jurisdiction, starting salary. I'd never dared to imagine. My job, auditing high-profile art transactions, vetting museum acquisitions, training staff to spot provenance manipulation, and working with international investigators to dismantle laundering pipelines before a single fake reached the floor. It was everything I'd fought for. Institutional accountability with real teeth. On the way out, I stopped at the glass wall and looked down at the city. It was raining, of course, but I didn't mind. Boston felt far away, now like another lifetime, one where I was begging to be heard, warning people who didn't want to listen. Now they were listening. That evening, I sat on the hotel bed with my laptop open, finalizing the onboarding forms. My inbox had grown out of control. Journalists still reaching out, former colleagues sending cautious feelers, museums asking if I'd consult on internal audits. I ignored most of it, but one email stood out. From Camille. Subject, "You did it. Body, from fired to fearless. Proud of you. Call me when you land. Champagne's on?" I smiled. It hadn't been easy. The months after the arrest were brutal. Lawyers, statements, threats from Marcus's people. At one point, Someone left a dead rat in my mailbox. A warning, I assumed. I moved to a new apartment the next week, but through all of it, I held the line and I'd crossed into something else entirely. Respect, power, a seat at the table at the Varley Foundation. We didn't just react. We reviewed claims before they went public. We flagged forgeries before anyone hung them on a wall. We made it harder for men like Marcus to operate in the shadows. The irony wasn't lost on me. Getting fired had launched the most important chapter of my career, and while the Declare Museum was still under investigation, its entire board had turned over. They'd even sent me a letter. Not an apology, exactly, but a formal acknowledgement. Your concerns should have been heard sooner. That was enough. I packed my bag for the next morning's flight, Istanbul first, then Madrid. 2 audits, 3 days, the start of my new rhythm. And as I zipped up my suitcase, I realized something. I wasn't just rebuilding my career, I was redefining the rules of an entire industry. And this time, I wasn't going quietly.